All right, we'll go ahead and begin. First things first. Oh, look, my pen. You know how I know this is my pen? Because it says Auburn University on
What? Auburn?
it. Anyways, so how are we doing?
Fine.
Okay, why are you just fine? What's going on, Oliver?
Oh, my friend recently got married, and I can't.
Why can't you? What's going on? Why don't you support love? What's going on here? What is it about true love?
She's Mormon, and she's only been dating this guy for 5 months, and they were like, let's tie the knot. I'm like, Miss Hannah, we haven't finished college yet. How's that considered?
Who knows? I mean, this could be true love. Sometimes when you know, right?
No.
You think that's not?
I don't think your true love is, immediately like 50 miles away from you.
Okay, so it's also long distance as well.
It's just
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
no longer. Like
Wait, so they were dating long distance.
they met in Italy, and then because
Okay.
of COVID, they like went back to the U.S. But he lived in Hawaii and she lived in Georgia, and then they did the whole 9 yards distance. Right?
Oh wow.
They started dating for a month in Italy, and then like 4 months like in the States, and then they were like, you know what, let's get married or whatever. And I was like, oh, okay, honey.
Okay, so but hopefully things will pan out between them.
Hopefully. I mean, considering that like everyone who went there were like, oh yeah, no masks or whatever, and they all traveled with like they all traveled to Hawaii, right?
Yes.
Like from Georgia to Hawaii,
Yes.
and then at the wedding, like no masks or whatever, and I was like, oh.
Speaking of no masks, let's try to get those masks on. Well, at least put them right here, drink, and then put them back on. How about that? Does that sound good? By the way, I completely understand. So the other day, I was asking questions down there at the help desk at the bottom, and I wasn't very close to the person, but I had my mask on, like you're supposed to, and I went up and I asked for directions, and the first thing that the security guard did was, "Excuse me, sir, can you back up 6 feet?" And in my head, I was like, you jerk. But of course, I mean, it makes sense. So that is a totally acceptable question, right, to ask me to back up, but I completely understand the immediate visceral response when someone tells you to put their mask on. I totally understand. But I will continue to tell you to put your mask on. So just drink, that's fine, and then put it back on, drink. That's totally fine. I understand you got a beverage there. What do you have? What is it?
A toasted white chocolate mocha.
You have a white chocolate mocha beverage. Is that a coffee?
It's toasted.
It's like it's a mocha, so technically it is a coffee, but like it's not. It is. Right. It just makes you feel better about yourself.
Yeah. What it cost you? $10?
No, 5.
$5? That's actually that's not bad of a price. $5 for a coffee from Starbucks.
Yeah.
Not
It's
bad.
like a seasonal drink too.
Not bad at all. All right, so just to kind of give you another reminder of how the rest of the semester will look. So today we're going to go over the developing world. So we're going to focus on 3 countries in particular, or we're going to focus on 3 countries. And then on Thursday, we're going to talk about the rise and fall of Hollywood. And those will be our last 2 chapters that we're reviewing. So exam 3 will be on the last 5 chapters that we reviewed. That will be your final assignment in the class. Off the top of my head, I don't remember when the actual exam is due. Does anyone remember? Or when I close the exam? It's sometime in December is when I close it.
Yeah, sometime in December.
So enjoy your Thanksgiving break after Thursday. Question, go for it.
So are we gonna have a final after that last exam? Or
Nope.
is that just gonna be?
That's it. Remember, in this class, there's only 3 graded assignments, and they're your 3 exams.
Yours is on the 7th of December.
That makes sense to me, yeah.
Yeah.
Close on December 7th is when your exam closes. So remember, in this class, there's only 3 assignments. There is that extra credit opportunity. That closes, or that deadline for the extra credit assignment is this Thursday at 11:30 p.m. After that, no extra credit will be offered. So do not email me. I will say no if you ask for extra credit, but beyond that.
What is it again? It's your Thursday? This Thursday?
Yes, extra credit assignment. Does that make sense? Does that add up?
Yeah, maybe I just remembered the options were wrong.
So yeah, this Thursday is when your extra credit assignment is due. All right. So that's how the rest. Obviously, we will not be coming back after Thanksgiving. So the only thing you'll have left to do is take the exam after Thanksgiving break. Enjoy your Thanksgiving. Me and my wife were debating if we were going to drive down to Miami because every Thanksgiving we drive down to Miami to see her family, and we decided to cancel that. So we're not doing that. So we'll be home. I should still be okay, but yeah, we decided not to do that after. But yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and get into our warm-up questions here today. So I always like asking this question because I teach this class often. This is the third time I've taught this class. I'm hoping to teach more higher level classes in the future, but every once in a while they'll probably give me another lower level class like this, so I might be teaching film history again someday. So I'm very interested in your feedback here on the things that you liked about the class and some things that you would like to change. I know when there's only a small fraction of the overall class in here, so of course if you're watching at home, once again, like and subscribe, but also potentially put a comment down to YouTube. Now I'm asking for comments. Now don't forget to comment and I'll respond. But once again, I genuinely want feedback from you in the class and on YouTube. Some things that you liked about this class, or some things that you would like to change. And of course, I'm always open to any suggestions on how to improve the class, even if that means changing the way I taught it this semester. So first things first, what are some things that you did enjoy about this class? Yes?
Primarily the fact that there was an in-person option.
Yeah, okay, yeah, definitely. So there's a face-to-face, I was face-to-face pretty much the entire semester, right? There was a couple times where we had to cancel class for various reasons, but for the most part, taught face-to-face. Like one of the very few people on campus. But yeah, what else? What are some other things that you liked about this particular class? Yes.
I like the. It's gonna sound kind of lame, but I like the whole PowerPoint thing.
Okay.
You have a PowerPoint on the screen and just kind of has your bullets of like what's important.
Okay.
It's like a lot of teachers or professors and stuff, like they'll make PowerPoints and it'll be like chock full of stuff.
Yes.
And then it's like you can't even really like look up and like listen. You have to just take notes the whole time. So like I like that it has just the important stuff and then you explain it. So then we can just listen and write down what we hear and what we think is important, rather than just like copying the entire PowerPoint word for word.
Yeah, most certainly. That is a deliberate, that is something that I do on purpose. Because I want to make every class that I teach as student-centered as possible, which means that I would like discussion as much as possible in class. This class, out of all the classes that I teach, this class is the most that I lecture in any class. So it's actually the most that I talk in any class that I teach. Usually it's way more discussion based. And that just comes with the nature of this class. There's a lot of information that you kind of have to get out, so it makes sense to lecture more. But even so, that's why I have those discussions at the beginning of the class, kind of ground you on some of the main themes that we'll be discussing. And that's why with PowerPoint, I'm someone who I actually hate PowerPoint. I do use it because it's sort of necessary, especially for this class. But I think this class is the only class, yes, that I use PowerPoint. Right, so there's many things. But yeah, so that's deliberate why I don't have that many words on PowerPoint, because I don't want you focusing on PowerPoint the entire time. All right, so let's talk about some things that you would like to change about this class. And I'm definitely open to suggestions. So, for example, the way that I structure this class has a lot to do with just being practical with a large classroom. So that's why I have 3 exams, multiple choice that you take all along. That's the easiest thing for me to do. Obviously, if I had some sort of paper, I would have to be grading 120 papers, and that's not something that I want to do. Right, so what would be some things that you would change about this class? And yeah, once again, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Yes? Okay, all right, thank you. That helps my ego. Perfect class. I like it. But is there anything that you would change? Would you like more assignments? Would you like uh, other things? Yes. Did you have a suggestion on that in the back?
So, I mean, I guess I would want to see a person for certain things to actually work on at home, or like not a black book reading or whatever the material that is, just having notes to go over their textbook read.
Yeah, I definitely hear that sometimes. Sometimes students they like random assignments every once in a while because it keeps them on track. I definitely see the appeal on that. I know I intentionally did not do that for a couple of reasons. First thing is I don't want to have to grade individual assignments, right? I don't want to put more work on me. And second, I'm well aware of the amount of busy work that students have, especially during this semester, during the pandemic.
Yes.
And I would rather you come to class ready to participate, ready to discuss the topics, ready to, yeah, rather than, you know, spending your time answering the questions, doing the reading, like reading responses and that sort of thing. But I most certainly see how having those weekly assignments can definitely help out somebody, especially someone who sort of needs those roadblocks throughout the semester. So I definitely see that. Yes.
So, since this textbook is McGraw-Hill based,
Yes.
if there's a connect module, I actually prefer those to reading the text because it allows you to skip over the shit that you know
Okay, sure.
and kind of focus on what you don't know. I find the connect module to actually be useful.
So what do you mean by that? Is there, you're saying there's something?
There's a module called Connect that McGraw-Hill has for most of their textbooks.
I see.
Apparently not for this one, or maybe they do.
Then maybe they do, I just didn't do it.
Use it.
Yeah.
And what it does is basically you can skip right through and start answering questions about the, it hits the important points of the text, and if you know it, if you get it wrong, it tells you go back and read this section.
Right.
If you get it right, then you just move on.
Yeah, but I definitely see that. I know if you bought the textbook, you get like practice exams that you can take, and there's like flashcards and other kinds of things you can do. But of course, to get that, you have to pay the full digital price, which I think is ridiculous. I can't. What was the price of the textbook? What was it?
$30, I think.
Well, that one, I'm sure that's not the digital. Like the digital version is what, like 100 something?
Probably
No,
90.
130.
It's like 90.
Yeah, it's something absolutely ridiculous. Yes.
The thing with the Connect modules that I have a problem with is that like you're paying for like one semester of classes and that class you'll never ever take again.
Yeah.
I would be perfectly fine with bootlegging a PDF online. I do not want to pay $90 for questions like who directed this film. Like I'm sorry, I just cannot see them. I cannot see the investment.
Well, I 100% agree with you on that. Like, I completely understand, and that's why I kind of look the other way. When if you were to buy something, if you were to get something like that, or if you buy a used copy, I'm fine with that. Yes.
Yeah, because there's like the classes that we have with the Connect module kind of like format, and like when I bought the book, it's like $80 more for those questions, and then it's only like one required thing and then like three optional things.
Okay.
So it's like you're basically paying like for 15 practice quizzes and then the book, and that's an extra $80.
Right.
Like it's just, I don't know. I don't see the point in it.
Yeah, I definitely I agree with everything that you're all saying. We sort of get pressured.
I'm sure one of the chairs of the department wrote the textbook.
Well, no, actually not. But these are famous film scholars, though. I'm not crazy about them, especially Borwell. But yeah, so good. So 3 online exams. Everybody's okay with that? Would someone want another different type of assignment? No. Okay. Is everybody okay with the fact there's only 3 assignments?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, I knew there was 3 assignments from the get-go, so I wasn't screwing around with those
Yeah.
assignments. Like I knew from the beginning there's only 3, so when the first one came out,
Yeah.
I wasn't lollygagging. I was taking it seriously.
Yeah.
Nebula is crazy.
I'm starting to feel that my exams are too easy. I don't need a response. But I'm starting to think that my exams are too easy. But that's okay. We can kind of move on from
No,
that.
I actually don't.
They probably are.
I like
They
it.
most certainly are. Yes.
Okay, the thing is, like, I'm fine with the exams. I just wouldn't understand like what like a worksheet would look like. Like, I can't really imagine what a worksheet would look like.
Yeah.
The only
hmm
thing I see you could really do is like maybe do a little quiz
Yeah.
to give
That's
you
what
little
that's probably what
labels.
it would
Yeah, that
Cause
would be.
that's because I had a chemistry class where we it was a setting setup with like three main tests,
be. Yeah.
and so he just in between them he would just check up to see make and have like like two quizzes or something
Yeah.
throughout the semester, and that's what he did a lot.
All right. Great. All right. So let's go ahead and move on to our rest of our discussion questions today. So, like I said today, we're focusing on a chapter called the Developing World, focusing primarily on, or I should say, my lecture is focusing primarily on African cinema, Iranian cinema, and then Indian cinema. These are things that I had to select these because this chapter is it has a lot of information in this chapter and it focuses on many countries, and I had to be selective because we don't have enough time to go all over these. And I selected these not because I think that these are the best examples of cinema or anything like that. These are essentially random selections from me. Well, not necessarily random, but I particularly focused on countries that we haven't really talked about yet, right? Just because of, for the sake of time and that sort of thing. So I wanted to particularly focus on countries that we have really not even kind of dived into. Yes, yes, sir?
Oh no, I was just.
Okay. Yeah, so I think it's important that I state before we even begin that this is not my wheelhouse, right? So African, Iranian, and Indian cinema is not my thing. Like there's not a lot that I know about these particular types of films. A lot of the stuff that I've learned came from the textbook. Like I learned these things from reading the textbook. So if it seems like I'm just regurgitating parts of the textbook, in many ways, I am, right? But I also don't think it's the easy thing for me to do would be just to skip this chapter because I don't know much about it. But I don't want to do that either because it's important that we focus on countries that tend to get ignored. But yeah, so today we're going to go over, once again, I picked African cinema, Iranian cinema, and Indian cinema. Yeah, so let's go ahead and what is it? What is the developing world? When someone says the developing world, what does that mean?
Uh,
Yes.
Is it just countries that aren't really industrialized yet, or they're building their way up?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So they're not industrialized yet, but they're starting to develop. Right. So you're starting to see um, sort of picking up on Western capitalism, industrialization, modernization, that sort of thing. Well, certainly, definitely. What else? What does it mean the developing world? Is that what everyone was going to say? Yes.
I mean, like, the developing world is like a term that like many white countries have like named other countries that aren't white.
it's a
Yeah.
So it's
non-Western.
just basically countries that aren't white are called developing world because they don't have the structure of capitalism that we live in.
Right, so there's definitely an othering component to the label of the developing world, right? There's some assumptions by that very name. There's assumptions that it's less than. There's assumptions that it's different, odd. It needs to catch up, right? There's a lot of assumptions with that name in general, and I think you're most certainly right. There's an othering element to that, to the name developing world, but it most certainly labels countries that are particularly non-white, non-Western, and it's important to, obviously there's an assumption with the developing world that these countries are inferior economically, culturally, like those assumptions. But it's important to also understand that many of the economic deficiencies of these countries really have a lot to do with colonialism, like the influence of Western imperialism inflicting these and the traumas that are left behind from this. So it's kind of you kind of see this manifesting in these films. So we'll kind of show some examples of that. But yeah, great. So that developing world. Describe the common themes that appear in films in the developing world.
Love triangles.
Love triangles, okay. What are we talking about, like Bollywood? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about. Yeah, okay. What else? What are some developing themes? Yes.
Themes of revolution.
Of revolution, most certainly, right? Because there's many, political changes going on during this time period, right? Exactly. There's civil wars, there's coups, there's the damage of colonialism, most certainly. What are the themes you notice in these
It's
films?
almost always the hero and the villain.
Okay, hero and villain narratives, right? In a lot of Bollywood films or Indian films, you see a lot of criminal film, that sort of thing. Yeah, most certainly. Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say that a lot of countries like this, they in the developing world, they have films about like the quality of life and like how oftentimes like it's not very good.
Yeah.
So they kind of make films about that, maybe like crime or people trying to like get out of that or whatever.
Pessimism, cynicism. Yeah. So the kind of sort of depicting the harshness of reality. Does that sound familiar? Neorealism, right? So you're starting to see the influence of neorealism. Most certainly. Another very important thing that pops up in a lot of these films is the tension between tradition and modernity. You see a lot of these themes appear in these films. So, tradition and culture, the way we used to do things, and the influence of Western countries and sort of like the growing pains of modernity and industrialization, right? This conflict that's manifest in these films.
Like in India specifically, you see a lot of conflict between parents wanting to arrange a marriage and I'm wanting to marry the girl that I love.
Yeah, most certainly, definitely, right? Yeah, exactly, right. All right. Next question: describe how films in these countries were inspired by Western filmmaking. Yeah.
Well, I know like they do a lot of musicals in India, so they probably were influenced by
Yeah, great.
American
Musicals,
Stunts.
classic like storytelling, especially in Bollywood, love stories, that sort of thing. Yes. Yes.
Oh, like budgets.
Was it
Like budgets.
budgets?
Like especially like in Bollywood, they go like all out.
Okay.
Well, they
Yeah.
realize that like they have, or like in the market, it's desirable to like go all out. So
Okay.
they kind and like they kind of like take inspiration from Western films,
Right.
like especially like in Hollywood, where like you see these
Yeah.
like this huge like huge gigantic budgets for like movies, and they're like, oh, we could do the same, you know?
It's like all about the spectacle.
Yes.
More like it.
Yeah.
Why do you think that films are such a big deal in India?
They have a large population.
Well,
That's one thing.
it's cult like there's 12 to 15 different cottage film industries in
Right.
India, and they're each completely different based on the local language. Like a Telugu movie is not necessarily produced by the same rules as a Tamil movie or a Malayalam film or
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And we're really not even going to get into the tension between the various states and various cultures that are in India, because India in itself is very multicultural. And there's obviously a lot of tension with cultural and religious tension in India, and we're really not even going to dive into that. But yeah, right. Well, so what do you know about Bollywood?
enough to teach an entire class on.
Really? Okay, excellent. You probably know way more than me about Bollywood then.
I distribute Bollywood films in the U.S. and
Okay.
I'm a consultant for AMC Cinemark and Regal on setting up their Bollywood program.
Give me a general summary of what distinguishes Bollywood from Hollywood. What would you say? What would you say would be some distinguishing qualities between the two, or are they too closely related to even distinguish?
There's a lot of imitation of Hollywood.
Yeah.
Every single producer of an Indian film, it's very important to him that his film qualifies for the Academy Awards.
Okay.
So it has to have that New York and LA run just to check the box.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how garbage it is or little of a chance it has. And there's like a prestige to
Okay.
and the typical movies that we get in theaters. There's also, I mean, I know this is maybe not for every movie, but there's like a lot of dance breaks or like music breaks. I don't know if that's just a specific genre,
No,
but
that's, yeah, where they'll be like driving a boat through the water, chasing a villain, and all of a sudden
yeah,
they splice a music video in the middle where they're dancing on a desert island.
I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, a lot of times when we think of Bollywood, we think of the large musical numbers breaking into song, breaking into dance, most certainly. Yes?
I'm not gonna lie, the only Bollywood movies I've seen are like the really crazy ones.
Yeah, the ones that you see on YouTube all the time.
Like, yeah, they're really
The craziest action scene you've ever seen.
Like I saw this one where this guy, he stops a car and then all these police officers come out and he like puffs his chest out. He attracts all of their guns.
And
And they're all their guns are
that's called Enter on the Robot.
yeah, they're all like right here, and then he starts shooting at them. Like he holds the guns all like this.
Oh,
So
wow.
That's a Tamil movie starring Rajini Khan, who
There
is
you go.
basically regarded as a god in that state.
like they go crazy. Like here, if you made a movie like that in the States, like a lot of times I feel like audiences they get really critical of that stuff. They're like, well, that's just dumb. Like that's just dumb, you know. And but over there, it's like, no.
Although technically, I mean, look, no one's a bigger Marvel fanboy than me, but I mean, sometimes it gets kind of ridiculous with some of these Marvel films.
I distributed that movie. It made about $5 million in America.
There you go. Big, yeah, film, yeah, exactly.
I like it. It's great.
So how long?
October 2010.
I'm telling you, you stop with the Marvel stuff.
Oh my god.
All right, so let's go ahead and discuss, and I'm essentially going to be reading off my notes. I apologize, that's just the way things are going to go. So obviously when we think of the developing world, a synonym for the developing world might be the third world, right? Obviously, even that term in itself has an othering quality to it, right? It's sort of demeaning, right? But I kind of begin to use this during this time to kind of describe the economic disparities in these various countries. Life expectancy and literacy are beginning to increase. You're starting to see a growing industrialization in these countries. Taiwan, Hong Kong, South Korea grew very quickly during this time period, mostly because investment in information technology. My focus will be primarily on Africa, India, and Iran, although this country goes over various countries, including Mexico, Iraq, various other countries that we just don't really have time to get into. Virtually all the countries in the developing world were once colonies of the West, right? So you can start to see sort of the scars of colonialism in many of the country's political makeups, right? So like corruption is a big issue. You're starting to see a lot of famines, wars, civil wars. HIV becomes very prominent during this time period, especially in Africa. So a lot of economic hardship, but also, real hardship as well. During this time period, you're starting to see these developing worlds heavily influenced by new cinemas, neorealism, French New Wave. In the 1960s, as film going was declining in the West, so remember we talked about during this time period what we often consider to be the white flight, where people are leaving the city for the suburbs. The inverse is often happening in these developing countries, right? So rather than, so you have farmers who are going to, and everyone's sort of migrating to these urban sprawls, and that actually has an influence, especially in India, on the film industry. That's why film becomes such a big boost, a big business, a money generator, is because people are watching films. Right? It becomes such a big deal to the point where many Indian filmmakers and stars actually become like part of political. They become politicians and that sort of thing. Oh, yeah. Great. All right, so let's talk about African cinema in general. Of all the third world regions, Africa remained the most underdeveloped. After the 1980s, of the 30 poorest countries in the world, 25 were in Africa. Most African countries did not produce a feature-length film before the mid-1970s, so film is sort of a new thing in Africa, right? African filmmakers moved towards international cooperation. Oftentimes, their films need to be funded because there's no other way to fund these films. In the 1970s, the Pan-African Federation of Filmmakers was created. It's an association of 30 countries aimed to promote African films in terms of production, distribution, and exhibition. So a lot of films were created by being funded by this organization. Promoted films as a medium of expression, sort of like political freedom, cultural, ideological freedom, that sort of thing. Let's talk about Sembene, I believe is how you pronounce this director's name. If you recognize that name, it is because he directed the film Black Girl. And I want to focus on another one of his films here. This one is, I believe it's pronounced Mulade. And this film is about, it sort of depicts the cruelty of, what's the word that I'm trying to think of? Genital mutilation, right? Female genital mutilation. Female genital mutilation, common practice in African countries. It's filmed in a remote village. The film argues strongly against the practice, depicting a village woman who uses mulade, which is magical protection, to protect a group of girls. So once again, you're starting to see these themes of tradition versus modernity, and that tension that is created. So I just want to show a clip from this film. This is Mulan. This actually was made in 2004, so we're sort of skipping ahead here significantly.
Bachiri. Use. Bachiri. Bachiri. Si. Ano olukanya ni nyamba na ngwende la kuji.
O bɛ fɛn dɔ de ɲini tɛgɛ ko tɛ ala o bɛ maaw ɲininka.
All right. Up next, we have The Winds of Ores. Winds are how you pronounce it. This one is an Algerian film. It depicts war-torn Algeria. And here is a scene from that.
Mais qu'est-ce que tu veux? Oui. Ben va la vendre ailleurs, ta poulaille. Allez, dégage.
Alright. If you're wondering about the visual quality difference, it's because this film was made in 1966 and the other film, Mulade, 2004. Right? That's one of the unfortunate consequences of lumping a bunch of films into the developing world. Is it's all over the place in terms of the years that you're covering here. All right. So up next, I believe it's pronounced Poos Poos, 1976. This is another film. It's a filmmaker who studied film in Paris and France. Poussin is a comedy. You see some recurring themes, some of the same recurring themes that we talked about before. Tradition versus modernity, collective values versus individuality. Many of the directors grew up watching American cinema, and their films are a dynamic interaction between Western filmmaking conventions and an exploration of African aesthetics. This is Poos Poos.
Tu sais, Rose t'aime bien. Elle ferait une bonne épouse pour toi. Ah oui, tu crois? Et tu devrais te dépêcher parce que celle-là, elle va la traîner longtemps.
Up next. All right, so Iranian cinema. So I got to give you a little bit of history. In 1979, there was a revolt that drove the Shah, or the king, and its dynasty out of Iran. The Ayatollah Khomeini took over the government. The country became a theocracy. The country was attacked by Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein. The war split the Arab states and was costly to Iran. The Khomeini leadership was shaken, and Saddam had gained stature. After the revolution, many filmmakers went into exile and film production slacked. Only 100 features were made between 1979 and 1985. There was mass censorship, especially on sexual display and other Western influences. Khomeini financed filmmaking that reflected his interpretation of Iranian culture and the Shiite Muslim religion. The regime encouraged a new generation of filmmakers. There was sort of a progressive push where women directors were allowed to produce films. Many of Iran's most talented directors turned to stories centered on young people. Foreign films were cut, then banned altogether. Moving on here, there was a strict censorship that was reinstated after Ahmadinejad rose to power. He's a right-wing isolationist. You might recognize that name. Filmmakers were encouraged to submit their work to festivals abroad, but they were ordered to avoid stylistic experiments and stick to national, social, and Islamic issues. All right, so what I want to do is I want to center on a couple of films here. The first one, this one, it translates to The Cow. It's about a man who really loves his cow. The cow ends up dying, and the rest of the villagers don't really know how to break it to him. They know it will crush him, so they begin to lie to him. Once the guy finds out the cow died, his demeanor diminishes significantly. But here is a scene from The Cow.
این چه کاری بود که کردی؟
تو مگه
از خدا تو ازش بپرس مگه من چی کارش کرده بودم؟ چرا به هم دروغ گفت؟
والا مشکلت من که
نمش هست اسلام دروغ نگفت اینی هم که گفته گاوت در رفته راست
گاو من که در نمیره که از خدا آخه اگه در بره کجا میتونه بره؟
گاو تو در رفته مشتی
مشتزن تو که خودت صبح رفتی پدیگر دیدی برادر من آخه من که به تو دروغ نگفتم بابا
گاو من همینجا
اگه گاوت همینجا تو تبیره است پس چرا نمیری پیشه خب برو تو تبیره میشه گاوت دیگه
آره بابا برو پیش گاوت دیگه راست میگه مشتی
من اینجا نشستم
مواظب چی؟
امشب اردوگاه دست به یکی کردم میخواستم گاو منو بدزدن
از کجا میدونی؟
اگه قراره بود بیا بیان گاوتو بدزدن چرا نشستی اینجا برو تو تبیره پیش گاوت
الان ماه در میاد اون حاج داره از خونه اون بالا میاد
All right, that was The Cow. All right, to our next film, Through the Olive Trees. It's set in earthquake-ravaged northern Iran. It's a complex study of the link between art and life. The narrative often blurs the boundaries between fiction and reality. This is Through the Olive Trees. There's a lot of beautiful shots in this film. is a film called The Blackboards. It's mostly non-actors in this one, portray an unemployed teacher on the road near the Iraqi border, struggling to educate refugees, who are often too concerned with staying alive rather than learning. And this is The Blackboard, or The Blackboards.
Dlatego wszystkie rzeczy. Urchas. Nauczysz. Hayas. Sonra projeti template açtı. Hasey avalit Allah. Burada. Tu savates. Hazır bir saat veriyor. أزاني سواد بشدة دقيقة تو تاني سواد بريد كتاب خواني روزنامة خواني بشي تابعيقا قصة بيوتش كبير أما سواد بدل دوا قولتك تو كتاب تاني بخواني تاني داستاني شخواني
داستان صدان داستان نزاني بهار الباير شوار رفقا حيوان ما برحا مثل كده صار حيوان ما دوام ما خافافه صار البان مولا وهدش ما هركد راما كد إلى أولا رمنا ما برما رمنا ما إنما رمنا تماني صار رفقا كنجي جيرتش أتاقل هي خاصة عديتش كلمات باصرش برمات لا باصرش نبر من جناح ماتو نبابا هي عديتش كلمة سرش برمي ماتو لا بر جناح تشيه مابو حل عديتش كلتا أمار وادس مريا حل ورشنا يوم غيرك بسرش برمات من حقهم يا جناح حل سرش مبر تا غيرك بسرش بردس نبر مداول أتاقل تسكر تجمان دايبهم لبا جيرتشو تنقوي شاشا جيرتشو تاقل سرشا بري باك شاكر هين آرسا بشتك شاكر كتبت شاكر تاقل آرسا بشو من شانا يعني تاقل مني تشباني أولاوي قوالي زرس يمهن كالي مني تيوان جيرت بشو آي شانا مني تاقل آره مني تاقل أتد حيوان تيما ديا كردو جنب مابي بارتا أتد ديرش كد سيبر أتد أمان أقوى بيني أمان ميري أتد أمان يوبيان
سواد قريب كيف بس بيقول لك داسان شيء جوا بيجي سواد بيجي من تقسك
أقل جنابال بزحمة بيبينا تشتي بيبينا
Blackboards. Another film, this one is Offside. This is actually in 2006, so we're kind of jumping ahead significantly here. It's about girls who are trying to watch a World Cup match, but they're forbidden by law to do so because of their gender. Female fans are not allowed to enter football stadiums in Iran on the grounds that there will be a high risk of violence or verbal abuse against them. It's shot in Iran, but screening was banned in Iran. But this is the trailer for Offside.
میتونم برم
ولی گیریم که بهت بدم چجوری میخوای از دست اینا بری دیواره دستشویی ندیدی دیواره دستشویی هر دست بسته دختر بابا
Kesin Serkan.
چه همین برو تو پیدا کن تو
بابا نیست پس چرا تو بازی ژاپن که تو همین استادیوم هم بود زن ژاپنی اومدن نشستن فوتبال دیدن
بله اون ژاپن زنی میخواد
All right, that was Offside.
To be fair, they're not missing much. Iran does suck at soccer.
Okay, big soccer fan?
Shoot, shots fired.
All
Yeah,
right,
wait,
excellent.
question. Would they be allowed at the Women's World Cup?
I think it's just because just not out in like
I
a
don't think
space.
the women are allowed to play soccer.
Yeah.
Oh,
Nobody
yeah.
has
Shoot,
a
they don't have
women's
one.
World
We
Cup.
beat them in 2014. Bosnia beat them, so they.
All right, our final country, India. So India had really no need for Hollywood's investments and influence. So cinema was India's fifth largest industry and its principal form of popular culture. The international market for Indian films expanded during the 1970s, drawing audiences from Russia, Indonesia. Film stars became parliamentary representatives and even heads of states. In the 1970s, there was a border war with Pakistan and civil unrest. Yeah,
One interesting fact about popular culture in India is there is almost no independent music industry in India. Only film soundtracks are played
Interesting.
on the radio. So if you're a star, you have to get into the film industry to write music for the.
Interesting. I did not know that. Fascinating. I appreciate it. Thank you. So we're really not even going to get into the political unrest, civil unrest, the border war with Pakistan, cultural turmoil between the individual states. We're really not even going to get into that. 1970s, as a new trends emerged, influenced by U.S. and Western cinema, adoption of more violence, eroticism, action-oriented productions. One film that I do want to show is it pronounced Sholay?
Sholay.
Sholay.
Yes.
Appreciate it. Sholay. Flames of the Sun, 1975. This is an example of, do you pronounce that Ducati? Ducati? Okay. The criminal film, it's a mixture of various genres put together. But this is Sholay. This is a scene from Sholay.
दो आदमी सुअर के बच्चा वो दो थे और तुम थी फिर भी वापस आ गए खाली हाथ क्या समझ कर आए थे कि सरदार बहुत खुश होगा शाबाशी देगा क्यों धिक्कार है अरे ओ सांभा कितना इनाम रखे है सरकार हम पर पूरे 50,000 सुना पूरे 50,000 और ये इनाम इसलिए है कि यहाँ से 50-50 कोस दूर गांव में जब बच्चा रात को रोता है तो माँ कहती है बेटे सो जा नहीं तो गब्बर सिंह आ जाएगा और ये 3 हरामजादे ये गब्बर सिंह का नाम पूरा मिट्टी में मिलाएंगे इसकी सजा मिलेगी
All right. Up next, let's see here. The Masala film. Are you familiar with that genre?
Yeah, Masala is just your general love triangle film.
A mixture of various different genres. So you have the melodrama, you have the love story, you have the musical numbers, all that sort of kind
It's
of.
similar to what you would call like a popcorn film here.
Okay.
It's not a award-winning. It's just fun.
All right, excellent. Do you know how to pronounce this?
Yadori Ki Barat.
So you said Yadon?
Yadon
Ki Barat. All right, so I want to show a scene from this one. This one actually did a little bit of research on this film. So it's a story about 3 brothers. Their mom teaches them a song when they're kids. They witness a crime, and the criminal family has their parents killed, and they all split up. And then later on in life, they are reacquainted at the very end of the film. And this is the closing part of the film where they find out that they're brothers, long lost brothers.
जी सीन का अभी तक नहीं है आप आदमी पेश तक जैसे ही वो आएंगे उन्हें बता दूंगा कि आप अंदर आ सकते हैं
हेलो, इज समथिंग रॉन्ग? कुछ नहीं। एक शिकार और बहुत से शिकार, ऊपर से नीचे तक, यहाँ से सड़कों तक 40 पत्थर और निशाना सिर्फ एक साथ और इनाम 25,000।
थैंक यू सो मच लेडीज एंड जेंटलमैन। इससे पहले कि मैं आज का प्रोग्राम पेश करूं, मैं आपको एक 15 साल पुराना गाना सुनाता हूं, इस प्रार्थना के साथ कि मेरी आवाज उन कानों तक पहुंच जाए जो कभी ये गाना मेरे साथ गाते थे, मेरे अपने भाई। यादों की बारात निकली है आज दिल के द्वारे, दिल के द्वारे। यादों की बारात निकली है आज दिल के द्वारे, दिल के द्वारे। सपनों की शहनाई बीते दिनों को पुकारे, दिल के द्वारे। ओ छेड़ो तराने मिलन के प्यारे प्यारे संग हमारे। बदले ना अपना ये आलम कभी, जीवन में बिछड़ेंगे ना हम कभी। ओ बदले ना अपना ये आलम कभी, जीवन में बिछड़ेंगे ना हम कभी। यूं भी जाओगे आखिर कहाँ होगे हमारे। यादों की बारात निकली है आज दिल के द्वारे, दिल के द्वारे। सपनों की शहनाई बीते दिनों को पुकारे, दिल के द्वारे। आगे भी होगा जो उसका करम, ये दिन तो मनाएंगे हर साल हम। अपने आंगन नाचे गाएंगे चंदा सितारे। यादों की बारात निकली है आज दिल के द्वारे, दिल के द्वारे। सपनों की शहनाई बीते दिनों को पुकारे, दिल के द्वारे।
job there.
I can harmonize.
All right, so let's talk about parallel cinema. So in India, in the late 1960s, the government encouraged the Film Finance Corporation to shift its support from commercial fare towards low-budget art cinema, creating a sense of quality film culture, quiet social commentary influenced by Italian neorealism, European cinemas. Often refusing the formulas of popular culture, the new films depended on government financing, which means problems soon occurred because of that. Censors clamped down on many directors. Political dissent was discouraged. No established venues for screenings as well, so a lot of problems with that. So it didn't last very long, but many films were actually financed during parallel cinema, including one film, The Churning, in 1976. This film sort of depicts a movement in India where India, which once at the time was sort of a milk deficient nation, quickly developed into the world's largest milk producers. And this film depicts the power of collective might in the form of a rural milk cooperative movement. This was entirely funded by 500,000 farmers. And this is a scene from The Churning. Sure. Question? Yes?
Weren't you a firefighter?
I was.
So that scene, how would you have went about it?
Yes, it's gone. It's gone.
Was the dirt, like, the strap?
By that time, that building's gone.
Oh,
yeah. That building's probably gone with water at that point. I mean, you can stop it from burning, but I mean, it's pretty much gone.
Basically useless.
Yeah, so I don't know how effective the throwing of the sand was. Not very good. All right, that's all I have. So we have one final lesson, and that's Thursday. I hope to see all of you here for one final hurrah. Right? That's it. That's all I have. Have a good one, everybody. In the stream.